I bought my first house with my own money. When I changed the locks, my parents broke in anyway. They even hired a locksmith to regain access while I was at work. What they found inside made them wish they had never touched my door. I had just come back from the grocery store, still holding the bag in my arms, when the scene before me made my whole body go numb. The door was locked, yet inside I could hear the scrape of furniture being dragged. I pushed it open, the paper bag slipping from my hand. A heavy jar of tomato sauce smashed on the brand new tile floor, red streaks spreading like a crime scene across my own living room. This house, I had bought it only 2 weeks ago. A small cottage on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. I hadn't even shown it off to many people, only shared a few photos with family, never once giving them the address. Yet, here they were, my mother, Helen, and my sister Clarissa, moving about as if they owned the place. Clarissa stood in the guest bedroom, a tape measure stretched between her hands. When she heard the door, she turned startled for a second before flashing a smug smile. "Oh, Victoria, you're home early." Her voice was light, but the brazen attitude made it hard to breathe. I stepped past the splattered sauce, my shoes sticking to the floor, and stared straight at them. "What are you doing in my house?" My mother emerged from the living room, still fussing with the sofa. She spoke casually, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "I thought you'd be at work until 5 p.m. Your sister and I just stopped by to see how things might be arranged better." I gripped my keys tighter, my heartbeat racing. I never gave anyone a key. "How did you even get in here?" Helen waved dismissively, brushing it off. "Last week, when I came by, I borrowed your keys to use the restroom. I just had a copy made for emergencies." "You worry too much." A chill ran through me. Clearly, she had planned this all along. Clarissa, still clutching the tape measure, didn't even look ashamed. "This place has 3 bedrooms, and you're living here alone. It's such a waste. My kids are crammed into that tiny apartment. This house makes more sense for us." I glared at her, my voice trembling, but sharp as a knife. "This is my house, not yours, not Mom's, mine." Clarissa frowned, pretending concern. "You can't be serious. You really plan to live here all by yourself?" I strode forward and yanked the spare key from her hand. Her fingers tightened, then gave way. Something ignited inside me in anger I'd never felt before. My mother pressed a hand to her chest, sighing as if she were the victim. "Victoria, after everything this family has done to raise you, you're going to be this selfish. Clarissa has 3 children. They deserve a proper home. Family helps family. You know that." My hands trembled, but my voice came out steady, almost frighteningly calm. "Family doesn't get to steal what I worked for. If you don't leave in the next 2 minutes, I'm calling the police." Helen's eyes blazed. Clarissa's mouth fell open in shock. Neither of them had ever seen me fight back. My mother hissed through clenched teeth. "You wouldn't dare." I looked at my watch. 1 minute and 50 seconds. The room filled with a heavy silence. Then the scrape of chairs, the slam of the door rattling the frame. They left. The stench of tomato sauce lingering. Red stains smeared across the floor at my feet. I sank down, fury and grief twisting inside me. For the first time in my life, I truly felt what it meant to be violated in the very place I thought was safest. I picked up the glass shards, scrubbing at the stains. But I knew deep down the real filth wasn't on the floor. It was in the greed and scheming of my own blood. This house was mine. I had worked myself to the bone for years to buy it. No one had the right to cross this threshold without my permission. The phone rang, Helen's name flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. Surrounded by the pungent smell of tomato sauce, I could hear my heart beating steady again, stronger, firmer than before. I understood then the boundary had stayed, been drawn, and once set, no one would ever trample it again. I hadn't even finished scrubbing the tomato sauce stains when the phone rang again. The screen lit up with my mother's name, Helen. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered, holding on to a sliver of hope that she might offer a reasonable explanation. But what I heard only tightened the knot in my chest. "Victoria, you're being unreasonable." Her voice rang out, laced with reproach. "This house has 3 bedrooms and you're living there alone. Have you thought about your nieces and nephews? The kids are growing. They can't keep squeezing into Clarissa's tiny apartment forever." I bit my lip, forcing myself to stay calm. "I bought this house with my own hard work. It's not for anyone else but me." Before I could finish, Clarissa grabbed the phone. Her voice came through, sharp and overbearing. "You're so selfish, Vic. The kids need space. Are you really going to let your own nieces and nephews stay cramped up in a 2-bedroom apartment while your whole upstairs sits empty?" I stayed silent for a moment. Memories flashing through my mind. Birthdays where I only had a small store-bought cake, while Clarissa got backyard parties with tents and music, nights. I worked extra shifts to cover tuition while she had everything paid in full by our parents. Now it was happening again. Except this time it was the house I had sweated blood to buy. No, I said firmly. This is my house. No one gets to decide but me. On the other end, Clarissa let out a mocking laugh. Think about it. What will the neighbors, the whole town say when they hear you have all that space and won't share with your family? What will people think when they see you turning your back on your own blood? I gripped the phone tighter. That fear of what people think had haunted me my whole life. But now anger drowned it out. I don't care what people think. I care about the truth. This house is mine. My mother's voice cut in full of dramatics. Victoria, I raised you, fed you, cared for you. Now it's time you think about the family. Clarissa sacrifices so much for her 3 children. If you just give up a room, everyone would benefit. I answered coldly. I don't owe anyone a roof over their head. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then my mother lowered her tone, sugar dripping in false sweetness. At least let Clarissa and the kids have the upstairs. You can stay downstairs. That would be fair. I drew in a long breath, weariness settling over me. They weren't listening at all. They just twisted words trying to corner me. No, I stressed each word. I already said it. This is my house. If you keep pushing, I'll treat it as trespassing. I hung up, my hands shaking, but my eyes growing harder, sharper. I knew this fight was far from over. That afternoon when I came back from running errands, I found a slip of paper wedged in the doorframe. The handwriting was my mother's. Think carefully. Family is your foundation. You can't stand against everyone alone. At the bottom was Clarissa's signature along with a room assignment list. Corner room for Ellie. Room by the stairs for the boys. Master bedroom for Vic. I froze on the porch. They weren't just talking. They had divided up the rooms in my house as if I never existed. In that moment, I understood more clearly than ever. This wasn't about temporarily needing shelter. It was a blatant scheme to take over. And if I didn't fight back, the house, the first true symbol of freedom in my life, would be swallowed whole as family property. I crushed the paper in my fist, tossed it in the trash, and looked around my little house. The walls still smelled of fresh paint. The tiles still bore faint stains of spilled sauce. I whispered to myself, I won't let anyone take this from me. Not my mother. Not my sister. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the streetlight shimmer against the glass, bracing myself for the long war ahead. The phone blared at 8 o'clock the next evening. On the screen was my father's name, Richard, 57, well known in town as a church board member. I knew if I didn't answer, he would keep calling until I gave in. Victoria, his voice thundered. What on earth are you doing? Your mother's been crying all day. Clarissa's stressed sick. All because you selfishly cling to that house. I gripped the phone tight, forcing myself to stay calm. Dad, I'm only protecting what's mine. I bought that house with my own work, not to turn it into housing for Clarissa's whole family. He cut me off immediately. Family matters more than anything. What do you think people will say when they know you let 3 children cram into a tiny apartment while your rooms sit empty? Everyone here already knows. They look at your mother and me with shame. You're making us lose faith in the community. I froze just as I feared they were dragging in reputation to pressure me. Since childhood, I had been conditioned to obey whenever I heard. What will people think? But this time, I refused to bow. I'm not responsible for what the neighbors think, I said evenly. I'm responsible only for my own life. On the other end came a long sigh. Then my father lowered his tone, still heavy with authority. Victoria, let me say this one last time. This family survives because everyone sacrifices. We raised you, gave you an education. Now it's time you repay us by taking care of your sister and her kids. I laughed bitterly. Gave me an education? I remembered every night working late at the cafe to pay tuition while Clarissa had everything covered by our parents. I swallowed hard and replied, you know the truth, Dad. I don't owe anyone here a thing. If you keep being stubborn, his voice turned harsh again. Don't blame me when I tell the whole family, you're an ungrateful daughter who thinks only of herself. I said nothing more. Just press the button to end the call. My heart pounded, but my mind was clearer than ever. 3 days later, I walked into the local grocery store and caught the pointed stare of Mrs. Peterson, our former neighbor. She leaned toward her friend, whispered something, and both glanced at me with disapproval. On my way out, I overheard fragments so cruel, letting her sister and those kids suffer. I bit my lip, forcing myself to keep driving home. Clearly, my mother had started telling the story everywhere. Helen always had a way of spinning things into a tragic performance. I could picture her in tears, painting me as the ungrateful child who abandoned her family. That evening, a text arrived from the pastor. Victoria, your parents and sister are deeply hurt. We need to meet and talk. You can't keep refusing. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. The pastor had only heard their side. They were mounting a campaign against me. On Sunday morning, as I stepped out the door for work, I found Clarissa at my gate holding her youngest, while the two boys bickered loudly beside her. She looked at me with pleading eyes, though her voice was sharp and calculating. "Vic, I'm only asking for something temporary. We're family. The kids need space. Are you really going to let your own nieces and nephews suffer when you've got so much room?" I looked at the three children, my heart wavering for a moment. But then I remembered that paper where she had already divided up the bedrooms. Nothing about this was ever temporary. "Go back to your apartment," I answered firmly. "You know this isn't for your family." Clarissa's tone flipped instantly, harsh and venomous. "You're heartless. The whole town will know exactly what kind of person you are." I got into my car, locked the doors, and didn't look back. In the rearview mirror, Clarissa clutched her child, eyes blazing. The sight only hardened my resolve. This time, I would not give in. That night, Dad called again. This time, his voice was calm in a chilling way. "Victoria, if you don't change your mind, I'll have a lawyer look into making this joint property. Do you think you can handle the consequences?" I clenched the phone, feeling the ground tilt under me. They didn't just want to shame me, they wanted to drag me into legal traps. But deep inside, I knew if I didn't stand firm, they would take everything. I looked around the quiet house, once my symbol of freedom. I whispered to myself, "Number, this Victoria won't back down again." In the dark, I began thinking of the next steps, not just to protect a house, but to finally truly stand up to my family. One weekday morning, I poured myself a hot cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed with a Facebook notification from my sister, Clarissa. I had already blocked most of her posts, but this time an old friend had tagged my name in the comments. Curious, I tapped it open. The image nearly made me drop my cup. Clarissa's 3 kids were crammed into a cluttered tiny room. The caption, written 3 weeks earlier while I was still finalizing my mortgage paperwork, stabbed me like a knife. "The kids are finally getting a bigger home. Thank the Lord, family always comes first." My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments. A friend asked, "So, which room will Amelia get?" Clarissa responded proudly, "The blue one with the garden window. It has such great light. The boys will share the room across the hall. My mom says we should keep the downstairs room for guests." I went numb. They hadn't just thought about moving in. They had already assigned the bedrooms. As if my house had never belonged to me. And worse, it all happened before I even held the keys. I left the kitchen and rushed to the bathroom, nausea rising, my throat tight, clutching the sink. I stared at my pale reflection in the mirror. This wasn't impulse. It was a calculated plan from the start. Another notification chimed. I wiped my face and picked up the phone. A text from my father, Richard, but he must have added me by mistake into a group chat with Mom and Clarissa. My mother's message froze. My blood. "Don't worry about Victoria's tantrum. Once we move in, she'll get used to it. She always gives in. Always gives in." Those 3 words felt like a curse. I shook violently, not only from anger, but from the realization that my entire life had been one long pattern of submission in this family. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor. Memories rushed back. My 15th birthday with nothing but a small supermarket cake while Clarissa had an outdoor party with a live band. Nights I worked myself to exhaustion to pay tuition while her entire college was fully covered by our parents. I took a deep breath and reopened the post. More than 50 comments, all congratulating her. "So wonderful. The kids finally have a proper place." Or, "Clarissa, you deserve this." Not once did my name appear. As if I didn't even exist as the owner. Rage surged through me. I slammed the phone onto the chair and jumped to my feet. This house had taken me 10 years of grinding work to afford. I had lived on instant noodles for weeks to save, and now they paraded it as their prize, shamelessly flaunting it online. That afternoon, I sat alone in the living room. Sunlight cut through the blinds, leaving golden stripes across the hardwood floor. I gazed around at the little house, the place I once thought would be the start of a peaceful, independent life. Now it was nothing more than a battlefield in my family's scheme to take over. The phone buzzed again. This time, a dinner invitation from my father. "Tomorrow night, 7:00 p.m. your mother's making pot roast. We need to talk about a solution. Don't refuse." I stared at the message. Part of me wanted to ignore it. But another part, the weak part, still craving recognition, pushed me to consider going. Maybe deep down I still hoped they would see their mistake, offer an apology, show a trace of remorse. But in my heart, I knew that dinner would not be an apology. It would be an ambush. And this time, I, Victoria, had to be ready to face them. No longer the one who always gives in. Dinner at my parents' house turned out exactly as I had feared. Not a place for reconciliation, but a trap. I had barely sat down, not even touched my fork, when my father, Richard, slid a folder across the table. Inside were listings for 5-bedroom houses near Clarissa's kids' school. My mother, Helen, smiled stiffly, stirring her iced tea. "We've talked it through. You transfer your house and we'll all chip in for a bigger place. Everyone will be happy." I said nothing. Just closed the folder and set it neatly in front of me. I knew if I objected out loud, they'd paint me as ungrateful. And sure enough, the very next morning, their smear campaign began. The first neighbor I ran into was Mrs. Peterson, standing squarely in my driveway. She narrowed her eyes, her tone half scolding, half disdainful. "Victoria, I heard you won't even give your sister and the kids a place to stay. People say you've got 3 bedrooms sitting empty. That's shameful." I froze, then realized the only possible source was my mother. I forced a smile and replied briefly, "That's a private matter, ma'am." But the rumors didn't stop. By the afternoon, the church pastor called, voice stern. "Victoria, I've heard from your parents. Family is sacred. You should reconsider before you disappoint the community." I gripped the phone so tight, my knuckles widened, feeling like every step of my private life was being stripped bare in front of the whole town. 3 days later, I noticed my mortgage statement still hadn't arrived. When I called the bank, my blood ran cold at the clerk's response. "We updated your address per request from a family representative. We've been mailing documents to your parents' home for convenience." I nearly dropped the phone. They had impersonated me to meddle with my finances. If I hadn't been checking online, who knew what else they might have tampered with? Before I could recover, an email arrived from the Homeowners Association accusing me of operating an unauthorized business out of my residence. I let out a bitter laugh, obviously a fabrication from Clarissa or my mother. I sent a formal response with proof my job was fully remote and harmless, but the sense of being cornered was suffocating. That night, a colleague messaged me. "Vic, did you see the GoFundMe? Your picture's on it." I clicked the link and nearly hurled my phone. There on the screen was a photo of me standing in front of my house with the headline, "Housing Crisis Helped 3 Children Find a Home." The organizer's name, Clarissa. The description painted me as a selfish aunt abandoning her nieces and nephews, leaving the family destitute. I shook with fury. They weren't just invading my privacy. They were exploiting my image to beg for money. I filed a complaint with the platform, immediately attaching proof of my ownership. Thankfully, by the next day, the campaign was removed, but the damage to my reputation couldn't be erased. To many, I was already the traitor to her family. That evening, I sat in my living room under the soft glow of the lamp, my chest tight with rage. The phone rang nonstop with familiar numbers from my parents' house. I didn't answer. I thought back to every moment growing up when I tried to push back and they silenced me with family or what people will think. They were repeating the same playbook, only this time. Bigger, crueler. I walked to the wooden cabinet and pulled out a blank folder. I began writing everything down. The copied keys, the break-ins, the bank impersonation, the HOA lies, the GoFundMe scam. My hand trembled on the first page, but studied with each line. That night, for the first time, I no longer felt like a victim. I realized my family had declared open war, and if I stayed silent, I would lose everything. I closed my eyes and promised myself, this Victoria will not back down. If they want a battle, I'll show them I am no longer the girl who could be pushed around. After days of being smothered by rumors, forged letters, and that humiliating fundraiser, I realized I couldn't just sit back and hope the storm would pass. If I wanted to keep my house in my peace, I had to fight back. On Monday morning, I called a locksmith to replace every single lock. The man, Walter, about 60, gave me a pitying look as he unscrewed the old hinges. I forced a smile, hiding my exhaustion. "Please replace them all. Front door, back door, even the garage side door. I need to be sure no one but me can get in." Walter nodded silently. When he handed me the new set of keys, I felt like a piece of control had finally returned to me. That afternoon, the security company arrived to install cameras. I walked with the technician pointing out each spot: front entrance, backyard, side path. Watching those tiny red lights blink gave me a strange steadiness. If anyone dared to step past my threshold again, they'd leave undeniable evidence. That evening, I spread my growing folder of notes across the table. Each page carried proof of intrusion. My mother copying keys without permission. My father's threats. Clarissa's Facebook posts. The forged HOA email. Screenshots of the GoFundMe campaign. I arranged them in order, slid them into a black binder. I knew I needed someone who understood the law on my side. I called Ethan, a college friend, now a civil attorney in Colia. After I sketched out the situation, there was a pause, then his firm reply. "Vic, you need to send them a cease and desist immediately. That's the most official warning. From now on, don't argue. Don't engage. Let paperwork and the law speak for you." For the first time, I exhaled with relief. A real way out. 2 days later, Ethan sent me a draft. Each line cut sharp. Any act of trespass, identity misrepresentation, or defamatory fabrication against Victoria Adams will be considered harassment and a violation of the law. Future incidents will result in legal action. Reading it made me tremble, but also feel powerful. I printed it, mailed the original by certified post to my parents' home, and kept a copy tucked into my purse ready if I ever needed it. The first test came only days later. Pulling into my driveway after work, I saw Clarissa's silver SUV parked squarely in front. Through the living room window, shadows moved. I opened my camera app. The feed showed Clarissa and my mother fumbling with a key, twisting it back and forth. I didn't hesitate. I dialed the local police, reporting an attempted break-in. When the patrol car arrived, curtains in neighboring houses twitched as people peeked out. Clarissa rushed down the steps, voice dripping with melodrama. She's throwing her family out on the street. We just wanted to show the kids where they'll be living. I calmly handed my phone to the officer, showing him the live footage. It was clear they were trying keys they weren't authorized to have. The officer's face hardened. If this happens again, we'll file charges for trespassing. My mother flushed red, shouting, "What kind of daughter calls the police on her own mother? You'll be branded ungrateful across this whole town." I met her eyes steady. I'd rather bear the name than lose everything. They were forced to leave, their glares searing into me. But inside, for the first time, I felt truly anchored. That night, I sat in my living room, the binder of evidence growing thicker on the coffee table. I knew the battle wasn't over. But I also knew one thing for certain. The line had been drawn, and this time, no one would ever cross it again. On Saturday afternoon, I got a text from my father. "The whole family will be at our house. This is an important meeting. You must come." I knew they wouldn't call it a meeting unless there was a scheme behind it. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but then I thought if I stayed silent, they'd keep twisting the story, keep painting me as the traitor. This time, I had to face them. When I arrived, the driveway was jammed. Aunt Margaret's car, Uncle Henry's truck, even Grandma Ruth's old Buick. Stepping into the living room, the tension hit me like a wall. My mother, Helen, sat at the center of the couch, Clarissa beside her with 3 kids fidgeting for sympathy. My father stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Opposite them, every chair was filled with relatives, clearly invited to witness this trial. My father spoke first, his voice booming. "Victoria, you've stirred this family long enough. Tonight it ends." My mother chimed in, eyes glistening with staged tears. "You can't push your mother and sister out of your life. Blood is blood." "How could you?" Clarissa stared at me, her voice sharp. "You have a whole house to yourself. Are you really going to let my 3 kids keep sleeping on top of each other?" I felt dozens of eyes pressing into me, waiting for me to fold. Instead, I set a thick folder on the coffee table. "Before anyone judges, here's the truth." I opened it, starting with documents showing I paid rent all 4 years of college, while Clarissa's expenses were fully covered by my parents. I handed them to Aunt Margaret, known for fairness, her brow furrowed as she flipped the pages. Next, I pulled out printed screenshots of Clarissa's Facebook post where she had divided up the bedrooms of their new house before I'd even signed the mortgage. I held it up. "This is how my sister treated my house as her prize." Whispers rippled through the room. Uncle Henry muttered, "Unbelievable." I wasn't done. Opening my laptop, I played the security footage. Mom and Clarissa jamming a key into my lock, confronted by the police on my porch. Gasps filled the room. Grandma Ruth covered her mouth, eyes watering. "And this," I said firmly, "is what they call the visit. It's trespassing." Clarissa's face drained of color. She stammered, "You're twisting this." "We were only in," here I cut in, holding up a copy of Ethan's cease and desist letter proof. I had no choice but to use the law to defend myself. The silence was so sharp I could hear the clock ticking. I took a breath, then laid it down. "I've made my decision. I'm selling my house in Charleston. I've accepted a position at my company's branch in Arizona. Next month, I'm moving." Shock rippled across the room. My mother shot to her feet, shrieking, "You would abandon this family?" I met her eyes. "I'm not abandoning. I'm escaping oppression." My father's face burned red. "You'll regret this. No one here will stand with you." I slid the folder toward the relatives and gave a cold smile. "Really? Aunt Margaret, Uncle Henry, Grandma Ruth read it all. See the truth you've been blind to." Aunt Margaret's voice cut the air. "I see. Helen Richard, is it true you made Victoria pay rent while giving Clarissa everything free?" My mother stammered, unable to answer. Grandma shook her head, whispering, "This is wrong." Clarissa burst into tears, screaming that I was cruel. But this time, no one rushed to console her. The eyes in the room shifted from judgment to doubt to anger at the injustice revealed. I stood, gathered my papers. Before leaving, I turned back. This isn't just about a house. It's about my right to live my own life. And I won't let anyone steal that again. The door closed behind me, but murmurs still echoed. I knew from that moment the story of the ungrateful daughter had begun to crack. For the first time, truth was on my side, and the entire family had no choice but to witness it. 3 weeks after that confrontation, my phone rang. It was Alice, the real estate agent in Charleston. Her voice brimmed with excitement. "Victoria, I have great news. Your house just sold for $25,000 over asking. Cash buyer wants to close in 30 days. For a moment, I went silent. All the pressure, exhaustion, and tears from the past months lifted off my shoulders. I nodded firmly. I accept. The contract was signed quickly. Standing in my living room, I looked at the white walls, remembering the nights I stayed up scrubbing stains after my mother and Clarissa broke in. Now the house was no longer a place of violation, but the springboard for a new start. Arizona welcomed me with a blazing sun and endless blue skies. Tucson was smaller than Charleston, yet it felt wide open, full of freedom. My company had arranged a temporary apartment near the branch office. On my first day, my new coworkers greeted me with genuine smiles. No suspicion, no judgment. One of the first to approach was Sophia, the HR manager around 40, with a warm voice. "We've heard great things about your work at headquarters. We're so glad you chose to move here." Her sincerity struck me. Here, no one knew me as the selfish Adams daughter. They saw me simply as Victoria, a capable employee, an independent woman. That first weekend, I joined coworkers on a trip to Saguaro National Park. At sunset, surrounded by towering cacti and laughter around the campfire, I realized I no longer felt like an outsider. Mark, a young colleague, leaned over. "Victoria, I admire how you left everything behind to start fresh. Not many people have that courage." I smiled at the horizon. Sometimes to find yourself, you have to be willing to let go. Soon I settled into my own rhythm. I bought a small 2-bedroom house on Tucson's outskirts. Just enough space to manage alone, yet still open and airy. Every morning I watered the Bowen villa at the porch, breathing in the scent of dry earth and blossoms. No mother knocking unannounced, no Clarissa barging in with a tape measure. The only keys to this house were mine. I began reorganizing my photos, trips, graduations, snapshots from solo journeys. I threw away every family picture that once suffocated me. On the living room wall, I hung a new image me atop Mount Catalina, hair whipping in the wind, the vast sky behind me. Word of my move spread back to South Carolina. One evening, Aunt Margaret called, her voice heavy with regret. "Victoria, I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner. After that meeting, I finally saw what you've endured. You were right to set yourself free." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I didn't need everyone's approval. Just a few voices of truth were enough to ease my heart. Even Grandma Ruth sent a handwritten letter in shaky script. "I regret staying silent too long. Live the life you want. Don't look back." I reread it over and over, dampening the page with my tears. Meanwhile, I heard Clarissa and her husband were still struggling in their cramped apartment. The GoFundMe had been taken down. Friends turned away once the truth leaked. My parents, Richard and Helen, were no longer admired pillars in town. People questioned their lies, and many who once trusted them now kept their distance. I felt no glee, no pity. It was simply the result of their own choices. 1 year later, on my 32nd birthday, I hosted a small garden party at my Tucson home. Friends and coworkers brought apple pie, wine, and flowers. Laughter filled the yard. I raised my glass, looking at the glowing faces, people who owed me nothing, demanded nothing, yet stood beside me with genuine respect. I said firmly, "Here's to homes that truly belong to us and to the families we choose." Glasses clinky-ducked in the warm evening air. In that moment, I knew I had stepped out of the shadow of control. I was no longer weak Victoria, the daughter who always gave in. I was Victoria, the woman writing her own life. And this time, I would never hand it over to anyone else again. Victoria's story reflects a reality many people face. Being belittled, exploited, and controlled by their own family. Yet, her choices reveal another path. Setting firm boundaries, using the law for protection, and seeking a community that values her true worth. In real life, anyone caught in the cycle of unconditional sacrifice can learn that kindness must come with limits. Freedom, peace, and happiness only arrive when we have the courage to say no and build life on our own terms. What do you think about Victoria's turbulent journey from being controlled to taking ownership of her life?